Hello everyone, I'm Dave Thomas, and this time I am building the Wayfarer model rocket from Apogee Components. Now this is still considered a beginner's rocket, although you have to glue the fins and such. But it's kind of a thick rocket, I would call it here. So it's not very tall, but it's fairly wide around. You can see the body tube here. So let's go ahead and open this up and make sure we have everything. Okay, so let's pull out the instructions. Do be careful here because there are often things in them. In this case, the decals and the fin stock were in my instructions. Alright, so we've got decals and fin stock, set of centering rings, engine block, alright, our body tube there. Okay, now here we've got our nose cone, and this is attached to a reducer. The reducer is not actually used in the kit, it's just it looks like it's one of those pieces that they make for several rockets. So we'll probably be able to just put this reducer in our parts box. Alright, we've got a parachute kit, Kevlar shock cord, and then a few remaining parts here in the bag. Alright, we've got our engine mount. This is a retainer ring for the clip. There's our engine clip and our launch lug. So it looks like we've got everything we need. So I will put most of this aside and we will start building. Our first task is to assemble the motor mount. So we're going to need these parts here as well as our centering rings. And first we're going to cut these out, and they are mostly laser cut here. We just need to cut out these little nubs that remain. Okay, so on each end we're going to measure 1/2 inch or 13 millimeters. Right there. And the markings don't have to be aligned with each other. Okay, now on one end of this I'm going to write aft on the inside so that I know that's the back end. And then on the forward end where our mark is, we're going to go ahead and cut a little slit there about 3 millimeters or 1/8 of an inch long. And this is where our motor clip is going to go. Just pop that in there. Okay, and then where our other marking is, that's where we're going to glue on a centering ring here. So I'm going to go ahead and push this on, make sure it fits. Right, now if it's a bit tight, you can chamfer the top of the motor mount inward using your thumbnail. And you can kind of chamfer this one outward using your thumbnail. And if that's not enough, you can take a little bit of sandpaper to this. We'll see if this is going to work for us. Alright, it's tight, but it goes on. And that little slit that we cut out on here, in this case, is going to hold that clip in place. Okay, so I'm going to put a bead of glue on here. Use white glue or wood glue, and I'm going to do it just ahead of the mark there so that I'll actually push my ring through it. It's not a big deal if you get a little bit of glue on the clip at this point. Okay, now I'm just going to move this forward until I get to my mark there. Okay, and then we just want to make sure we're evenly spaced there. And then any remaining glue, just take your finger and form that into a fillet. You can do the same on the back side of it, or actually this would be the forward side, the inside of it. Okay, just like that. Clean off the excess glue from my fingers there. Alright. Now we're going to take the shock cord here and just remove that tape. Sometimes you can just pull the tape over it. There we go. Okay. Now, this is Kevlar or generically polyaramide. Okay, now one of the problems with Kevlar is that it tends to fray easily, as it's kind of a slick surface, and we can control that by adding just a little bit of regular super glue to those frayed ends there and going just a little below them. Okay, and then you can just take a tissue and just wipe off the excess quickly, trying not to glue your fingers to them. Alright, and then you can take your hobby knife here and just cut off the frayed ends at a point where you still have glue on the end of the shock cord there. And I think it's time for a new blade in my knife. There we go. And this just makes it easier to work with. So first we're going to tie the shock cord onto our motor mount. So I'm just going to put this on here. You're going to tie a double knot in it, or 2 half hitches. Alright, if you have a little excess in here, that's not going to hurt anything. Okay. So this then will be held in place by this ring here. And remember that other notch. So we're going to take this entire thread, move that through. Okay, and this is going to go basically right up to our engine retainer. Now again, we want to make sure this is going to go on, and it's providing a lot of resistance there. So take that back out. I'm going to take a little bit of a medium grit sandpaper. Okay, so this is 150 grit. Just kind of roll that up. It's hard to roll sandpaper. We'll do it here. Alright, we're just going to stick that in here. Just twist it around a few times here. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and cut a little bit more out of that notch. Okay, let's try this again. Actually, I'm going to do it without threading it first. Oh yeah, that's much better. I got to find the other end again. Alright, so now that's going to fit over. Make sure the shock cord is actually in that notch. And we're going to run this around. Okay, now I'm going to back it down just a little bit. I'm going to add my glue here. Again, this is so we'll push through the glue with the ring. Like this. Okay, and once again get that straight and perpendicular there. My camera has this annoying habit in that it only records 10 minutes at a time, so it shut off while I was talking here. Alright, so what I have done at this point is finish putting this ring on. I put a fillet of glue on either side of it. The inside fillet here actually encloses all of the Kevlar here. So that's anchoring that in place. And I also put in the thrust ring. Okay, so for this part, put glue on the thrust ring rather than in the tube so that excess glue gets pushed outward and not down into the motor mount. The final thing we need to do with the motor mount here is add this retaining ring. So this just provides a little bit of extra reinforcement for the shock cord. Now we're going to have to cut a V-notch in here. We want to be careful we don't cut all the way through the cardboard there, but we need a little bit of space so that the shock cord can fit through this as well. Okay, now I'm going to do a quick test fit here. Alright, and it's a little tight, so I'm going to take my thumbnail here, chamfer around the inside edges. Alright, I'm going to do the same thing on the tube, but chamfer it inward. There we go. Alright, and then we'll just take the shock cord and run it through this ring as well. Alright, so I'm going to put it in that notch. Like so. Put the rest of the ring on there. Alright, I'm going to put a little more glue in. And then just while holding the shock cord, I'm going to snug that down. Like so. Okay, and I'm going to let this whole assembly dry. As it's doing so, the other thing I'll do here is I'm going to run the shock cord down through it. And this will just get it out of the way for when we insert this into the body tube later on. While the motor mount is drying, I'm going to go ahead and mark the body tube for the fins. And for that we're going to need the fin marking guide that's here on page 2. Now if you don't want to cut up your instructions, just go ahead and photocopy this and then cut it out. Alright, so like I did with my motor mount, I'm going to mark aft on the rear end of this thing. Alright, I'm going to wrap the fin marking guide around the body tube and giving me a little bit of space down here. And then we line up the 2 tick marks, which is also going to be our fin line there. And then just take a small piece of masking tape here, hook that together. And I'm going to take another small piece of masking tape and just put it somewhere between fin lines here, but attach it to the body tube as well. And this will keep it from rotating. Now we're just going to go through and mark where each of those fin lines is. Okay, now you can use a door jamb or a drawer edge, or in this case a tube marking guide. This one's made by Estes. Alright, it's basically just a whole bunch of straight edges here. And now I'm going to mark where each of those fin lines is going to be. And I'm going to give myself some excess just to help align things. Now for the launch lug here, I'm going to run this the entire length of the body tube. And the reason for this is it gives me a nice straight line that will help me align the launch lug correctly. Okay. Now since the motor mount is not ready to be inserted, I'm going to go ahead and just set this aside as well. While we're waiting for the glue to dry on the motor mount, I'm going to turn my attention to the fins here. And the first thing I'm going to do is sand it while it's still within the fin stock. Now sometimes the fins fall out in shipping or packing and things like that, and if that's the case, you can do the same thing with individual fins. First, I'm going to start with some 220 grit sandpaper to help smooth this out on both sides, and then I'm going to move to 400 grit sandpaper to give an even smoother finish. Now remember, you always want to sand in line with the grain of the wood here, so don't sand against that, go always parallel with the grain. 220 grit followed by 400 grit sandpaper. Alright, and now we just need to cut these out. Much like the centering rings, there's just generally a nubbin or two here that's still holding these together. So just gently go through and pop those off with your hobby knife. Alright, now this makes no mention of doing any type of rounding or airfoiling of the fins, so that will be up to you. I think I'm actually going to make this just straight edges on here. Now that's definitely going to make it give it less performance. It won't reach as high of altitude, but generally I launch in a pretty small field anyway. So you can round the edges here, especially the leading edge if you want. Alright, you can round the trailing edges. I usually don't round the tip edges here, and definitely don't round the root edge. What we can do on the root edge is give it a little bit of sanding. In fact, I'm going to sand all these edges just to get rid of those little nubs that were left from the laser cutting process. And here we can just take some sandpaper here and put it on a flat surface. And we're just going to drag all 3 fins here. Alright, and the removal of the soot from the laser cutting is a pretty good indicator of how far you want to go. I'm using 220 grit sandpaper for this. You can actually go down to 100 grit if you need to, and then just smooth it out with the finer grit. Alright, those are ready. Now in the instructions it shows using sanding sealer on these. I am actually going to paper my fins using some adhesive label paper. So the first thing I'm going to do is go through and vacuum these off to get rid of any remaining dust. For adhesive labels here, I'm just going to use some mailing labels, and you can get this in the business supplies of most department stores. And these come in different sizes. Now this one is a whole sheet here of paper, and that's it. So we're going to cut this. You can also get these in smaller pieces, like half sheet or quarter sheet. You can probably get away with half sheets on this. And we'll just put the excess out of the way here. Alright, first I'm just going to place these to see how much paper I'm going to need. And yes, it's going to take about a full sheet in all. So I can just freehand cut this. So what we'll do now is peel the backing off of this. Alright, and put the sticky side up here. Alright, so here we're just going to place each fin onto the sticky side of the paper. Alright, they don't have to be exactly in the same spots, nor do they have to be lined up like that. You can flip them over, whatever you need to do to fit. Now we're going to take the other sheet of paper here, peel it off. And I'm going to put this right on top. Smooth that on. Okay, you can even smooth it down onto the other paper here, kind of seal it in there. Oop. It's okay, that won't hurt anything there. Now what I'm going to do is set this aside, put it on another flat surface, and I'm going to stack several really heavy books on top of it. And we'll let that go for a couple of hours, and that will help ensure that we get a good bond between the paper and the fins. While we're still waiting for the motor mount and for the fins, we'll go ahead and prep the nose cone here. So the first thing to do is just score this area where the two are joined. You don't have to cut all the way through it yet, but just score that all the way around, and then you can just bend it a little bit and it should pop loose. Alright, now this is a perfectly good transition. I would definitely save this if I were you, and I'm going to put this in my parts box. Alright, this is the part we'll be using. Now, I don't know how well this shows up in the video, but this nose cone was molded from two halves, and there's a definite seam here, and especially up toward about the top third of the nose cone, there's a fairly deep ridge on either side. Now, if you don't mind that, you can do nothing with the nose cone. Just leave it the way it is and go paint it or whatever. Alright, now if you do want a smoother nose cone, what we're going to do is go ahead and use some sandpaper to smooth this down as much as we can. Now once we've done that, we're going to have scratches on both sides of the nose cone, and so it's just a good idea to do the entire nose cone. Even if you don't care about the seams here, I would recommend just sanding the entire nose cone with 400 to 600 grit sandpaper, as it'll make the paint adhere better. I am going to start though with a dry sanding with 220 grit, and I may even want to go lower. We'll see how this goes. So I've sanded those grooves, and most of it has disappeared. We still have a little bit of a groove right there, and just a tiny amount right here. Okay, which means that we don't need to do a lot more work on this. So if you're good with having a little tiny groove there, and the paint will probably fill that in, you can go up to a higher grit sandpaper and go ahead and smooth this out. Now you notice it's all dull now. I've removed all the glossiness from that. Now what I'm going to do is wet sand this with some more 220 grit, and then move up to 400 and 600 grit to get a nice smooth finish here. Now I can't do wet sanding under my camera, and if you're not familiar with it, simply you'll need some wet dry sandpaper, and so this is made to be wet so it doesn't fall apart. It's usually black or gray or occasionally blue or purple, but you just get this wet, and it doesn't take a lot, and get the sandpaper wet and just sand it all the way around. What this does is the water acts as a lubricant to help give you a finer finish, and also it washes away the grit or the dust that comes off of this, and so it doesn't clog up your sandpaper as much. So I'll take this off camera, do a 220 followed by a 400 followed by a 600 grit, and then I'll come back. So here's my nose cone after 220, 320, 400, and 600 grit wet sanding. And it's come out very smooth. In some places you can just barely see where that seam was. Like right a little bit there. And it probably doesn't even show up in the video here. But this is ready to be primed and painted. Now, if you go by the illustration here, alright, they're painting the rocket a metallic blue, and they're doing it all the same color here, and that kind of blends into the decals that are. The glue has dried on my motor mount, and so we're going to put this into the body tube. Now make sure you've got the aft end here. And first I'm just going to try a dry fit. Alright, so that should slide in, and when it's done we'll have the two tubes flush with each other. Now to add the glue to this, I'm going to use an applicator. And what I'm going to do first is measure from the inside of the forward ring down to the tube there, and that's going to give me the distance where I want to put the glue in. Alright, I'm going to get a healthy dollop of glue on this, and I'm going to put this in but not touch the sides till my thumb hits, and then I'll bring that all the way around. Okay, now I'm going to slide this in just a little bit and then do the same thing but about 1/2 inch inside. So I'm actually going to start right inside of the body tube there, so I slide through the glue. If you happen to get a little glue on the motor mount tube or something like that, it's fine, it won't hurt it. Okay, now my personal preference is to have the engine clip on the same side as the launch lug. So I'm just going to turn mine there. Alright, and then just take something flat, push that all the way in, and that makes those tubes level with each other. Okay, now once this dries, I'll go ahead and put in some fillets on the aft edge there. While I'm waiting for glue to dry on the motor mount and body tube, I'm going to go ahead and assemble a parachute. So just open up the little kit here. Alright, and we have some shroud lines, which we'll just pull from the tape. Alright, these are reinforcements, and then we have the main parachute sheet here. Now Apogee makes this as a choice of parachutes, so they print out several lines, and depending on what size you need, you can cut out either a 12, a 15, or an 18-inch parachute. Now for this kit we need the 15-inch one, which is the middle one there. And so let's go ahead and take some scissors. You can also do this with a hobby knife. And we're going to cut out all along that middle section. The rest of it you can just discard. Grab my reinforcements here. Okay, so now we're going to take the reinforcement circles here, and those will go on the dotted lines here. And these will just provide reinforcement so that the shroud lines are less likely to tear through the plastic. If you run short of these or you need to replace it, you can use loose leaf page reinforcers that you can find in most business supply places. And I actually keep a supply of them on hand in my building kit just in case I break a parachute during a launch or something like that. So if you're building some other model and it doesn't include these, you can put them on anyway. Next we're going to poke a hole through here, and for this you want to use a pencil or a pen, not a knife, because we want a blunt hole with kind of push through edges here. Okay, so the edges have been pushed up, and this actually gives us more reinforcement. If you try to do this with a knife, you'll likely cut through the reinforcement, and you won't get a good grip on there for your knots. Now we're going to take the shroud line here. This is all one piece of string. So first, just go ahead and gently tease it out. You don't want to pull this too fast or you'll end up with knots. Okay, now we're going to take and grip one end between finger and thumb in one hand. And we'll do the same thing with the other end here once I find it. Alright, so I've got my two ends, Now I'm going to create two hooks with my fingers, and this hook is going to grab the opposite line, and the same with the other one. Shake that out there. Alright, now we're just going to start pulling. And again, make sure you're not making knots while you do this. Okay. So I'm going to give you one hand here. This is really long. Okay, so down here we have an end and a loop. And in my other hand I have an end and a loop. Alright, now holding on to one end here so they don't slide, just go through and cut all those to length. Okay, now still holding on so we don't change the lengths here. So I've always got a grip on it with at least one hand. We're going to move to the other end and do the same thing. Okay, so we'll just cut off the loop in the end, and now we have 3 equal-sized shroud lines. So start by just taking one of those, and again it's going to want to try and gather up and make a knot. And what we're going to do with each shroud line, we're going to go from one corner to an adjacent corner, and then we'll switch and do the second 2 and then the third 2 over here. Okay, so just come in. I like to come in from behind. Alright, and then we're just going to tie a double knot here, or 2 half hitches. Alright, just give that a little tug to be snug. The main trick here is to use the same amount of string for each knot. And there's no great secret or hint I can give you, it just takes some practice. They don't have to be perfectly the same. Okay, so now we have a single loop there, and I'm just going to do the same thing with the other 2 shroud lines. Now I have 3 loops of shroud lines here. I'm going to turn this over and I'm going to gather all of those shroud lines. Alright, and kind of hook them over one finger like this. Now I'm going to go to the front side here of the sheet. I'm going to hold that in the middle. And then I'm going to pull all of my shroud lines tight here. And what we want to have is all of those corners coming down at roughly the same level. And you can, kind of rotate each of those back and forth a little bit if you need to. You can change your hold up here. All right, but those look pretty good. Now, there are 2 ways to do this. In your instructions, it ties it directly to the nose cone. Now, you want to make sure your nose cone is painted first if you're going to use this method. And so what you'll do is just gather up those loops, stick them through like this, pull it open wide enough, and you can either pass the parachute through them. All right, so you pull the whole parachute through like that, or you can pass the nose cone through. All right, and then you pull that tight and it'll form a knot on the eyelet there. I'm going to take this back off before I do any tightening. Now if you've seen my other videos, you know that I really like to use snap swivels on my parachutes, and even on streamers sometimes. So here I'm going to gather up the lines one more time, since we've been shifting around with them. Now the snap swivel you can get at just about any place that sells fishing supplies. Pass the loops of the shroud lines through the swivel end here. Open those lines back up, so you got to loop once more, and then pass the entire swivel through, and then pull that tight. Alright, recheck the length of your shroud lines. Okay, if you don't like the way it came out, just loosen this and try again. If you're happy with it, then go ahead and just take a little drop of white glue or wood glue and apply it to the knot and just kind of work it in there. Alright. Now the size of the snap swivel doesn't matter much. The rocket's not very heavy, but the snap part has to be able to go over the nose cone eyelet and move freely, okay, which this does. If you put one on there and you can close it, but it binds in one direction or another, then you need to go up to the next highest one. My fins have been pressed together using these 3 tomes. All right, they're pretty heavy books here. You don't have to necessarily use these, but something of approximately this size and weight is the pressure you're going to want. All right, so this is what we're going to end up with. And we want to carefully and roughly cut these out. You're going to want a new blade in your knife here for this part. Okay, so here first we're just going to carefully cut in between the fins. Okay, and then you can go ahead and come in closer. Be careful you don't cut the fin here. I'm leaving about 1/4 inch or 5 to 6 millimeters there. Now this is optional. You can use sanding sealer, or you can just go without any type of wood grain treatment here. This has the advantage of giving you a very smooth surface for painting. Okay, and then once we get to this point, we want to be very careful here, and we're going to cut these to right above where the paper is. Okay, and it's still feeling a little bit loose there. Now something else here, and this is usually something I do after I cut the paper, but this feels like it's trying to come off. And so what I do is take some regular viscosity super glue. You can also use the ultra thin stuff for this. And let's see, not on the root edge. All right, but on the other edges here, I'm just going to run a film of this onto the edges. And this will also help seal the paper to the edges of the fin so it doesn't try to come off like mine is doing. Okay, and again, you don't want to do this to the root edge because it'll make it so it won't glue as easily. Alright, and then I just need to let this dry, and then we'll come back and then trim it off. I'm going to do the same thing with the other 2 fins off camera, and then I'll come back. The super glue has hardened after about 20 minutes, and so now I'm going to go in here and just trim off the rest of this paper. And just be careful that you don't go and gouge the wood. Alright, so once you get it trimmed down to almost to the wood, then you're going to want to take this to some sandpaper. And we're just going to sand off the rest of that. And this is also a good reason to have the super glue on here, is it does make it act more like wood than paper. And so you'll get a better edge there. So this is 220 grit sandpaper, And it seems to be doing fine. Okay, so we're going to get it down pretty close to flush. Now on the root edge here, you want to make sure it is completely flush. Okay, and you notice, or you may notice, let's see if we can see it in here, okay, that it flares out a little bit, and we want to keep that on the root edge. It actually gives us a better gluing surface. You know, on the other edges, once you get them down to this point, you can kind of round that off and blend it in more if you like. Okay, and we'll come back and do the other surfaces here. Alright, now I'm going to put this onto a block so I've got an even surface here. I'm going to sand down my root edge just a bit more. I'm just going to pluck off that little thing there. Okay, now at this point, if you want to put in rounded fins or an airfoil, you can do it at this point. Even if you want to keep the straight square fins, you'll want to taper in the paper to the wood. All right, if you have any paper edge that's above the wood, it's going to look really strange once you paint it. So just sand those down a little bit. And then you can even come in with some 400 grit sandpaper here and just kind of finish the edges. Now again, my root edge, I've got the paper sticking out. That's actually good. I'm going to keep that there. Right, but now I'm just going to blend this into the wood. There we go. There's one fin done. And as I said, I'm purposely not rounding these. I'm just going to keep it square. But you can round these at this point if you like. You can round the trailing edges. Okay, however you want to do it. Just keep the root edge flat. Alright, I'll do the other two off camera and then come back. My motor mount glue is dry. And so in preparation for the fillets in the motor mount and also for the fins, I'm going to put the shock cord back where it belongs. I'm going to thread this through the engine mount here. The hardest part is getting past the thrust ring. All right. Once that goes, we can just pull it through. All right, and I'm just going to wind it up here and stuff it back in the tube. I'm just going to put a tissue down inside of that so it doesn't come out while we're working. Alright, so here's how the fins look after they've been sanded around all the edges here. And again, the roughness here on the root edge is fine. Okay, so I'm going to just do a quick check here on my lines. I'm just going to make a little mark approximately where the fin will be there. And then I'm going to take some sandpaper, and it doesn't really matter what grit, anything between 100 and 220 is fine. And I'm just going to drag that along my line. You don't need to do it really heavily. All I'm doing is breaking up the glossy surface there, and this will allow the glue to hold a bit better, at least in theory. Alright, now I'm going to take one of the fins, and here again we're going to want to use white or wood glue, and I'm going to put on just a thin film here. I don't want a really big bead, just a thin bead of glue. And now I'm going to stick that onto my line. Alright, and the edge should reach all the way to the bottom of the body tube there. And I'm going to pull that off. It came out a little lopsided there. I'm going to scooch that over a bit. Okay, and I'm going to let this dry for 30 to 60 seconds, which will allow it to get tacky. About 60 seconds have passed, and so now I'm going to put the fin right back on there. And now, since that glue is tacky, it'll hold in place rather than just flopping over. Alright, now I'm going to sight down the body tube here. Okay, everything looks straight. If you have a fin alignment guide, now is the time to use it. Okay, this one is made of cardboard and it's put out by Apogee. And they make different ones for different size body tubes. Now this is just going to slide in here like this. Alright, and what I want to check and make sure it can go all the way off again. That way I'll be able to do the launch lug at the same time as the fins. If your fin alignment guide will not go completely over and allow you to pull this off the back, then don't put the launch lug on until after you've removed the fin alignment guide. Okay, so I'm going to let this glue for about 5 more minutes, and then I'll repeat this with the other 2 fins off camera and then come back. The glue on my fins is still setting up, but we can work with the launch lug here. Now, according to the instructions, this is going to go 4.5 inches or 11.4 centimeters from the aft end. Now, this entire thing is 9 inches long. So we can basically go from the other end. So half of 9 is 4.5 inches. So we can do 4.5 inches from the top. So we can just measure right to there. Oops, a little farther up. Won't make that much of a difference. Alright, I'm going to measure this. Put a little mark there. And then just like I did with the fins, I'm going to take my sandpaper here and just roughen that up a little bit. Okay, and we'll just put a bead of glue on the launch lug here. And we're going to put that in place. Now here again, this is why I have the line going all the way down, is it gives me a good sight line so that I know my launch lug is straight. Got a little excess glue there. It's going to form a little bit of a fillet. We'll come back and make real fillets later on. Alright, so now I'm going to let all of this dry for at least half an hour. While we've been doing all of this gluing and trimming and sanding, I've also been painting the nose cone. And so this is a dark metallic gray. I didn't have any metallic blue like the illustration had. And this has had a coat of primer and 2 coats of paint. And this looks really good the way it is, so I'm not going to do anything else with this. I'll do the same thing on the main part of the rocket once we get to that point. My fin glue is dry enough to work with, and so the first thing I'm going to do is finish off the fillet inside here for the motor mount. And so here once again I'm just going to take a cotton applicator. I'm going to stick that in the glue, and then I'm going to go around the outside edge here. And yes, it's kind of sloppy looking, and we'll clean up part of that here in a moment. Alright, but I want to make sure that we've got glue all along that outer edge. Oop, I got a little too far. Now the excess glue there isn't going to hurt anything. It adds a little bit of weight. But if you don't want it there, you can take another cotton applicator and just use that to clean things up a bit. Or at least smooth things around. The layer of glue inside of this will actually help protect it against hot exhaust gases, so I'm not too worried about it there. Alright, we really don't need a fillet on the inside of the ring there, as it's got fillets built into the motor mount. Okay, so that's all we need there. And we're also going to do the fin fillets. And I'm changing glue here. Both of these glues I'm using are white or wood glues. One's white and one's yellow. All right, so for our fillets here, I like to do the two facing fins at a time. So I'm just going to run a bead of glue here. I've got some kind of bumpy glue in there. It's kind of hanging things up. This should help fill that in. Alright, and I just take a finger, smooth those in. Now some people like really heavy fillets that really kind of blend the fin into the body, and that's fine, but do those in layers. Don't try and do them as one big thick fillet. It's almost guaranteed to run and shift toward one end or the other. It just won't look pretty. Now we'll just continue this with the other fins and with the launch lug. So I'm going to let these dry completely. It'll probably take at least 2 hours, maybe more. And then come back and see if we need to do any more. So in some cases, we might have some bubbles in there. As I said, originally gluing the fins on left a couple of little bumpy glue spots there. This should fill in. But if it doesn't, we can come back and either add more glue to it or use some contour putty to fill those areas in. My glue fillets are dry, but as we look closely here, we've got some little bubbles going along the launch lug here, and on the fins we've still got some bumpy lumps in there. Okay, and so you could just add more glue to this and you'll end up adding a lot to get rid of some of those bumps and such. But instead I'm going to use some plastic model contour putty. Now you can find this in hobby shops. Mine's made by Testers. I know there are a couple other brands out there as well. But this is a fairly quick drying water soluble putty. And you essentially apply it like you would glue. Now this is just for aesthetic and aerodynamic purposes. You don't want to use this simply to make your fins stronger, because it won't. Alright, you can just kind of smooth this in, and if you want thicker ones, don't put as much pressure on it. Alright, and even with this you may need to do it more than once, depending on how much stuff you're trying to hide. It does start drying almost instantly, so you want to make your smoothness as quickly as possible, or it'll start pilling up as you do it. And I'm just going to go around all these just like we did with the glue. Now we'll let this dry, and it'll dry in about an hour. It's very sandable, although it does tend to clog up your sandpaper, so you may need a spare or two piece with you. All right. And this is also optional. As I said, it doesn't add to the strength, it just makes it look nicer as well as increasing its aerodynamics. So if you don't have this stuff or you just don't want to use it, you can fly this completely without any type of filler in here, as long as you got the strength of your initial fillets. Okay, so once again we are waiting for stuff to dry. The contour putty on my fillets has dried, and I'm going to take some 400 grit sandpaper here. I'm just going to roll it over a dowel, and I can use that then to sand those fillets here, at least initially. Okay, now that one buckled a little bit, and I think it's because earlier I tried to do this and it was still a little bit wet. So I'll probably go ahead and apply a little bit more there. So I'm going to go ahead and sand these all around, and then we'll take a look at them. Okay, now this is clogging up the sandpaper really well, but I've got the initial stuff knocked down, and we can see there are still some little imperfections here. Alright, and we can go ahead and apply another coat of the filling putty there, the contour putty, and I'll do this again. Now I'm going to do all this off camera and get back, because this is really boring to watch me sand this all the time. So off camera, I'm going to go ahead and improve these fillets, and then I will prime the rocket for painting. So here's the rocket after I applied that second layer of fillets, and I've also put 2 coats of primer on here. And the primer helps me find imperfections. So like we got a little bit of fiber coming off on there. Some of the paper is not quite sanded down evenly, so we've got ridges there. And it is showing a few spots in my fillets yet that are still kind of wavy there. A little bubble on that one. Some of the other ones look fine. So at this point you can either just ignore it and go on, or if you really want the good fillets, I'm going to try using some wood filler here. Now this one is made by DAP, and I particularly like this one. It has a very fine grain to it, and it dries a little bit more slowly than the contour putty does. So here I'm going to use it much the same way. I'm just going to take a little bit here on my finger, and just smooth that in. This is going to give me a thicker fillet. Now if you're having trouble getting smoothness or uniformness with your fingers, you can also use some small spreading instruments. And this can be as simple as using a tongue depressor or a popsicle stick like this. Alright, but it'll give you a much more uniform fillet. Now if you keep it perpendicular, that's going to give you a smaller fillet. If you keep it more closer to horizontal, that gives you a thicker fillet there. Alright, but this way I can just do it without adding a whole lot and just filling in the spots that needed it there. So if I do it this way, I get a lot less sanding that I have to do. Alright, that fillet's looking pretty good. That one needs a little bit of work. So here I'll kind of spread it on with my finger again. Okay, so once again we'll let this dry and I'll sand this off and then probably give it its last coat of primer there. My rocket is painted, and in the end everything got 2 coats of primer followed by 3 coats of this metallic gray paint. And so now we just need to put everything together and add the decals. So I'm going to pull out my shock cord here. And one of the things I'm going to do with the shock cord is I'm going to put a little bumper on this. Now, there are places that make these and sell them. They kind of look like cut up ear protectors. But you can also do this just with some heavy masking tape. And so I'm just going to make a pad here. And the idea behind this is just to distribute the stress of the shock cord so that it doesn't cut into the body tube and produce what's called a zipper. Alright, so I'm going to fold this over a little bit. Okay, and before I squish it all the way down, I'm going to move this down the shock cord just enough so that it's about halfway out when the shock cord is extended. Okay, so about there. So now if the parachute forces the shock cord back like this, the Kevlar has less of a chance of ripping into the body tube there. Alright, we can just tuck that out of the way now. So up here on the other end, I'm going to pass the shock cord through the eyelet. I'm going to tie a double knot or 2 half hitches here. Okay, snug that down. And we don't want a whole lot of free end here, so if this is more than about 1 centimeter there, go ahead and trim it back. Not all the way to the knot, but short. And the idea is to help keep it from getting caught between the body tube and the nose cone shoulder. If that happens, the ejection charge may not be able to release the nose cone. Once I have that where I want it, I'm going to put just a little dab of super glue on the knot to hold it in place. Alright, now about a nose cone length down the shock cord, I'm going to tie another loop. And I just do this by tying an overhand knot in the loop, what's called a water knot. Alright, so we just pull the loop through there. Okay, and this is where we'll attach our parachute here. Now, if you want, you can attach it up here on the nose cone. This just makes it hang a little bit straighter and puts a little less lean, if you will, on the parachute that can kind of make it spin a little bit. Alright, and then I'm going to open up my parachute here, a little bit at least, so I can see where I'm at. Alright, so folding the parachute, there are a lot of different ways to do it. My current favorite is to start where I've got each corner overlapping another one. Now that's not it, because there's no corner there. Alright, so there's a corner. So we're going to fold it in half first of all. Alright, so that now those 2 corners overlap, these 2 corners overlap, and these 2 corners overlap. Okay, I'm going to fold that over so that now the corners from each side are all stacked up on the corners in the middle there, and we've got this kind of kite-shaped triangle or quadrangle Alright, now I'm going to take my shroud lines here, gather them up, and I'm going to roughly divide them in half and pull the loop of them up here. Put that together. Now I'm going to fold one side over the shroud lines like this, and fold the other one over that. So we got a wedge now. And I'm going to take the tip of that wedge and bring it down to just at the corners right there. Okay, and I'm just going to fold this, since this is a wide body tube, I'm going to fold this over one more time here and kind of roll it that way. Now if you're prepping this for launch, you're going to want your recovery wadding or dog barf down in there. If you're using wadding, probably around 5 sheets or so. If you're using dog barf, about 2 diameters worth. Now, if you don't know what dog barf is, it's just blown cellulose insulation. It's an initial outlay unless you know somebody's got some in an attic that they'll let you scrape off. A bale of this, last I checked, is about $30, and it'll last you for at least 3 lifetimes. Okay, so right now I'm just stuffing this down in there. Okay, and then once we get to the parachute here, we'll just stuff it down as well. Okay, along with the snap swivel, and then that last bit of shot cord. And then just make sure that nothing's getting in between the body tube and the shoulder of the nose cone. Alright, I'm going to give this a shake. Alright, if the nose cone comes out on its own like that, add a little bit of masking tape here. Don't even start with a full circumference, maybe like half the circumference. Try again, it should not shake loose. But you should be able to pull it out reasonably easily with just a couple of fingers. Alright, I am now ready for the decals, and for that I'm going to need a little basin of soapy water, so I'm going to get that and come right back. I have here a basin of water to which I've added just 1 drop of dishwashing liquid. And what this does is it temporarily makes the decals less sticky, and so you can reposition them easier. And I actually learned this on Apogee's website on one of their how-to videos. Okay, so I'm going to do the fins here first. So we've got a star field here for each fin, and basically these, you can use them in the order that they've got here, or you can mix them up. But what I'm going to do now is just run that through the soapy water, kind of squeegee off the excess there, and then this will go onto a fin. So we're just going to try and line this up more or less in the center. Okay, well, that looks a little off, so I'm going to bring it up. And again, this is why I use the soapy water, is it allows me to very easily reposition the fin. Okay, once you've got that where you want it, then just go ahead and squeegee off the excess liquid there. And in a day or two that will become permanent, sometimes even sooner. Alright, and I'll do the same thing for the opposite side of the fin. Okay, now you notice it's got a little bit of white border there, and maybe their cutter didn't get exactly where it should have. If that annoys you, you can go in and attempt to trim that off with a hobby knife. Make sure you use a really sharp one, because it's going to tend to want to just go where it's already been cut. I'm not going to worry about it here. Alright, I'm going to go through here and do the rest of the decals here in extremely fast motion. And there is my completed Wayfarer. This is a really fun rocket to build, and I especially like the very detailed decals here. If you hadn't noticed, the images used for the decals are the same ones that are in the opening and closing images of this video. Have a great launch and a safe recovery, and please stay tuned for more of my videos.